Amara Wells was no stranger to first-class cabins. As the CEO of Nexatech, a trailblazing tech company specializing in artificial intelligence and sustainable energy solutions, she spent more hours in the air than on solid ground. Yet, the luxuries of the first-class lounge and the plush seats were never just indulgences for her, they were symbols of hard-earned success, the tangible results of years of relentless work, sleepless nights, and strategic risks. Amara carried herself with a quiet confidence, a no-nonsense demeanor that commanded respect wherever she went. But beneath that poised exterior was a woman who constantly balanced the pressures of running a company at the cutting edge of technology with the complexities of personal sacrifice and maintaining her integrity. Her mornings began early, typically with a jog through the city park, clearing her mind for the day ahead. By 8 o'clock, she was already immersed in back-to-back meetings, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts or reviewing the latest prototype designs from her team of engineers. Her phone buzzed incessantly, but Amara had mastered the art of selective attention, knowing exactly when to focus and when to delegate. Unlike many in her industry, she was unapologetically hands-on, believing that true leadership meant understanding every facet of the business, even the minutiae. Despite the pressure, Amara refused to compromise on fairness and transparency. In an industry where backroom deals and ruthless competition often overshadowed ethics, she made it a point to lead by example. Her employees respected her not just for her visionary approach to technology but also for the values she stood for. It was important to Amara that success wasn't hollow or bought at the expense of others. She wanted to be respected for her integrity just as much as for her achievements. Outside the boardroom, Amara's life was quieter but no less complex. She lived in a modest yet tastefully decorated apartment downtown, a conscious choice to avoid ostentation despite her wealth. Her closest relationships were few but deeply meaningful, with a small circle of friends and mentors who grounded her in moments of doubt or exhaustion. Her personal life often took a back seat to the demands of her career, but she guarded her privacy fiercely. Amara was well aware that being a woman at the top, especially a black woman, brought layers of scrutiny and expectations that men rarely faced. Every decision she made carried the weight of representation whether she wanted it or not. Amara's current trip was no different from many others. She was en route to a high-stakes investor summit in London, where Nexatech was poised to announce a breakthrough partnership with a global energy conglomerate. This deal could catapult the company into an entirely new stratosphere. As she boarded the plane, she moved with her usual composed assurance, greeting the flight attendants politely but without unnecessary familiarity. First class was her realm, the familiar soft leather seat by the window awaited her like a well-earned reward. Yet, as she approached her assigned seat, her calm confidence flickered for the first time that day. A man, middle-aged and dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, was already seated there, casually flipping through a newspaper. His gaze lifted briefly and then returned to the page, as if her presence was an unwelcome interruption. "I believe this is my seat," Amara said firmly, her tone crisp but courteous. The man smiled a cold, dismissive smile and leaned back. "I'm afraid there's been a mix-up. This seat was reassigned to me." Amara felt a familiar surge of frustration, but she maintained her composure. "I've confirmed with the airline staff multiple times. This is my seat, 1A. A flight attendant approached, seemingly uncertain, flipping through the manifest on a tablet. After a brief pause, she apologized and explained that the seat had indeed been reassigned due to an overbooking issue. Amara's patience wore thin. Overbooking was one thing, but the cavalier manner in which her rightful place was being taken away stung deeper. "It's my seat," Amara repeated, meeting the man's gaze evenly. I have a meeting in London that cannot be delayed. I'm asking you to move. The man's expression hardened. You'll have to take it up with the airline. I'm not moving. A murmur began to ripple through the first-class cabin. Fellow passengers turned their heads, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled amusement. Amara felt the familiar weight of being scrutinized, judged in an instant not just for her position but for her identity. Despite the support she silently hoped for, the flight crew made no move to enforce the seating arrangement. Instead, they seemed hesitant, their voices low as they exchanged looks. The man's quiet confidence clashed sharply with Amara's steady insistence, and the power imbalance in the cabin became painfully clear. Amara had learned early in her career that confidence alone was often not enough to shift situations colored by implicit bias or unspoken hierarchies. Still, she refused to cede ground. This wasn't merely about a seat, it was about respect, recognition, and the simple right to occupy the space she had earned. Eventually, she was offered a seat in business class instead. It was a downgrade, yes, but what stung most was the message beneath the gesture. In that moment, the weight of countless microaggressions, invisible barriers, and unacknowledged prejudices pressed down on her. The very luxury that had once symbolized her rise now felt like a cage. Settling reluctantly into the business class seat, Amara exhaled slowly, steeling herself. The journey ahead would be long, but her resolve remained unshaken. She was determined to prove that her success was not a fluke, that her integrity could not be undermined by a misplaced seat or a dismissive glance. As the plane took off, Amara's mind raced through the possibilities. This incident, humiliating as it was, ignited a spark within her, a determination not just to fight for her place in the cabin, but to challenge the systemic forces that sought to marginalize her. The stakes were no longer just business, they were personal. The sky stretched vast and unyielding outside her window. Amara's eyes fixed on the horizon, a silent promise forming in the depths of her resolve. This was only the beginning. Amara slid down the aisle, her eyes scanning for her assigned seat. When she reached 14C, a man was already settled in, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the window as if daring anyone to challenge him. "Excuse me," Amara said, her voice steady but polite. "That's my seat." He didn't look up. "I think you're mistaken." A flicker of surprise crossed Amara's face, quickly replaced by quiet resolve. She wasn't new to confrontation, but this was different. The way he refused to move felt like more than stubbornness. It was a silent challenge. The murmurs of other passengers swelled, a mix of confusion and anticipation. Flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances, the air thickening with tension. Amara met the man's gaze, unflinching. "I have a boarding pass for this seat. Please move." He shook his head. "Not happening." The crew approached cautiously. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but firm, "Please resolve this quickly so we can depart on time." Amara's mind raced. Escalate and risk an explosive confrontation? Or de-escalate and lose not just a seat, but her dignity? Her silence answered the question. The man leaned back, smug. "You're not the only one with stakes here." Amara sensed the power play beneath his words, the subtle assertion of control. This wasn't about seats. It was about hierarchy, about who belonged and who didn't. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "I'm not moving. And I won't let this be about intimidation." As the crew prepared to intervene, Amara's refusal sent ripples through the cabin. Passengers watched, some nodding silently, others whispering. A shift had begun, an unspoken challenge to authority masked by a simple dispute. The flight was no longer just a routine trip. It was a battleground where deeper conflicts would play out. And Amara was ready. The cabin was thick with tension. At 30,000 feet, the conflict between Amara and the man had escalated beyond a mere disagreement. The passengers, once quietly observing, were now split into factions, some quietly rooting for Amara, admiring her calm authority, others sympathizing with the man, who grew more defiant with every challenge. Amara's poise was tested like never before. She moved through the cabin with quiet confidence, her voice steady despite the rising unrest. Every word she spoke was measured, every gesture deliberate. She was the embodiment of leadership under fire. But the man refused to back down. His defiance fueled the growing divide. Murmurs spread through the rows of seats, some whispered support, others cast doubtful glances. The atmosphere shifted from uneasy to electric, the simmering conflict threatening to explode. As Amara worked to defuse the situation, rumors began to spread among the passengers and soon, beyond. Whispers circulated that the man at the center of the storm was no ordinary passenger, but the CEO of a major corporation. The possibility sent ripples through the cabin, carried by phones and hushed conversations. By the time the flight crew announced the situation would be documented and handled upon landing, the story had already escaped the plane. Media outlets caught wind, headlines blinking to life: in-flight showdown, CEO sparks controversy at 30,000 feet. The issue threatened to spiral beyond anyone's control. Amara knew the stakes were far higher than just the passengers on this plane. The turbulence was no longer just physical, it was a storm that could shake reputations and redefine power. And as the flight continued, every moment became a test of leadership, resilience, and the true cost of standing one's ground. The hum of the engines faded to a tense silence as Captain Amara called for an urgent meeting with her crew and the onboard security team. After reviewing the reports and weighing their options, her voice cut through the cabin, calm but resolute. "We're grounding this flight. Safety concerns demand it." The announcement rippled through the passengers like a shockwave. Murmurs of disbelief turned to outright anger in some corners, while others nodded in quiet relief. In the terminal, airline officials erupted in protests, branding her decision as rash, damaging, even career-ending. But in the growing chorus of social media voices, many hailed Amara as a hero, a captain who put lives before schedules and profits. Amara stood in the eye of the storm, grappling with the fallout. The weight of criticism pressed heavily, but so did the knowledge that she had made the right call. The incident had ignited a national debate on safety, responsibility, and corporate accountability. For Amara, there was no turning back. The glare of the media was relentless. Every move Amara made was dissected and debated in newsrooms and on social feeds alike. Headlines questioned her judgment, her leadership, even her intentions. Airlines and corporate partners, once enthusiastic collaborators, now hesitated. Cold calls turned to silence, meetings postponed indefinitely. The pressure was suffocating. Late at night, Amara sat alone in her apartment, the weight of doubt pressing hard. Had she been too stubborn? Too idealistic? The isolation felt like a physical ache, a loneliness bred from being misunderstood and singled out. But amid the storm, small moments flickered like beacons. A late-night call from an old friend reminding her why she started this fight. A quiet conversation with a trusted ally reaffirming the values she refused to betray. These brief connections grounded her, pulling her back from the edge of surrender. Standing her ground wasn't easy. The fallout was painful. But Amara knew deep down that some things were worth more than approval or ease. She couldn't and wouldn't compromise. Amara stared at the glowing screen, the cascade of tweets and comments flooding her feeds like a relentless storm. Some praised her resilience and tenacity, others sneered with dismissive cynicism. The world was watching and judging not just her performance, but every facet of her identity. The public fallout was brutal, but beneath the surface, a deeper conflict raged. The weight of being not only a leader but a symbol, a successful woman of color in a world still marred by entitlement and bias, pressed heavily on her chest. The vulnerability she felt was raw and unyielding, sometimes manifesting as anger at a system that seemed rigged against her and those who looked like her. In quiet moments, Amara wrestled with the loneliness of representation, the burden of being expected to embody strength at all times. But beneath the rage was something more profound, a fierce determination. She remembered the words of a mentor long gone, "You don't fight just to win your place. You fight so those who come after you don't have to." That night, Amara dug deep, past the noise and the pain, into a well of clarity and power. This wasn't just about reclaiming her seat at the table. It was about challenging the very rules of entitlement and injustice that had tried to keep her out. With renewed strength, she stepped into the storm, ready not just to survive but to change the game entirely. The fallout from the incident could have shattered Amara's career, but instead, it became the catalyst for her most decisive move yet. Determined to reclaim her narrative, she crafted a plan that was as daring as it was authentic, a live interview broadcast to millions, where she would confront the controversy head-on. In the quiet moments before going on air, Amara rehearsed not just her words, but her resolve. When the cameras rolled, she spoke with a rare combination of transparency and grace. She acknowledged the incident candidly, refusing to shy away from difficult questions, but swiftly redirected the conversation toward larger, urgent issues: respect, equality, and corporate responsibility within the travel industry and beyond. Her message struck a chord. Viewers saw a leader who was not defined by controversy but by courage, someone willing to use her platform to challenge systemic problems and advocate for meaningful change. Social media buzzed with support, and the media's narrative began to shift. Amara's bold public stand didn't just rebuild her image, it set a new standard for accountability and leadership, inspiring others to follow her example. The studio lights were harsh, the cameras unblinking, and the air thick with anticipation. Amara sat across from the interviewer, a sharp and seasoned journalist known for cutting through the spin. The questions came fast and fierce, each one a calculated jab aimed at destabilizing her, challenging her credibility, and questioning her decisions. "You chose to give up your seat under controversial circumstances. Do you regret it?" the journalist pressed, voice edged with skepticism. Amara's gaze was steady. "I did what I believed was right at that moment. It wasn't about convenience, it was about integrity." The interviewer leaned in, voice dropping. "But some say you could have handled it differently, that you played the victim." Amara smiled faintly, unshaken. "I don't play victim. I tell the truth." Across the city, the airline scrambled to contain the fallout. Official statements were issued, press releases crafted with care. The man who had taken Amara's seat, once vocal in his version, found his narrative unraveling under public scrutiny. Back in the studio, Amara's words resonated. Her eloquence, calm confidence, and unwavering conviction turned skeptics into supporters. Social media buzzed, public opinion shifted like a tide. Later, at a press conference staged by the airline, the CEO addressed the controversy with uncharacteristic humility. "We acknowledge the concerns raised and are committed to revisiting our policies," he said, eyes briefly flickering to Amara in the audience. Amara stepped forward, voice clear and resolute. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about respect for every individual, and the power of standing firm in your values. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Headlines tomorrow would tell a story not of scandal, but of dignity and leadership. As the spotlight faded, Amara knew the battle for narrative control was won. She wasn't just a passenger on this journey anymore, she was the one steering the course. Months had passed since that unforgettable day, since Amara's stand that had sent ripples far beyond the confines of a single airplane cabin. The incident had sparked more than headlines, it had ignited change. Airlines across the country, and even globally, had begun revising their policies on equality, respect, and passenger treatment. Training programs were rolled out to staff, focusing not just on service, but on dignity and empathy. Public awareness campaigns took root, reminding everyone that respect in public spaces wasn't optional, it was essential. Amara herself had transformed. The woman who once shouldered the weight of expectation and doubt had blossomed into something greater. No longer just a CEO focused on quarterly reports and shareholder meetings, she had become a symbol of courage and integrity, a beacon for those who dared to stand up against injustice. On this day, as she approached the boarding gate, the atmosphere felt different. There were no whispers or sideways glances, only genuine smiles and nods of acknowledgement. Flight attendants greeted her warmly, passengers offered quiet, respectful nods. The air itself seemed lighter, charged with a new energy of mutual respect. Amara paused for a moment, inhaling deeply. Her journey had not only been about reaching destinations but about reclaiming space and dignity for herself and for countless others. As she stepped onto the plane, the cabin felt welcoming, inclusive, a microcosm of the new era she helped usher in. Her story was no longer just about a confrontation. It was a powerful testament to resilience, to standing tall against injustice, and to the quiet strength of demanding respect. And with that, Amara settled into her seat, ready for whatever came next. The airport lounge air, thick with the scent of roasted coffee and the low murmur of international commerce, felt like a purgatory of polished chrome and hushed ambition to Anya Sharma, a woman whose entire life had been a series of meticulously planned ascensions, each step a testament to her unyielding will and a mind that operated with the cold, hard logic of a supercomputer. But despite the dizzying success of her global venture fund, Valhalla Capital, she craved nothing more than the simple sanctuary of a first-class seat on this red-eye flight to London, a brief 18 hours of escape from the incessant demands of her empire, a rare moment to simply be, a luxury her relentless schedule rarely afforded. She moved through the jet bridge with the quiet confidence of a queen returning to her throne, her modest black travel suit a deliberate statement of substance over flash, and as she stepped into the aircraft, the familiar, comforting hum of the engines was a balm to her weary soul, the subtle scent of leather and luxury a prelude to the rest she had been so desperately craving. But the moment she reached her seat, a small, yet profound sense of unease washed over her, for it was occupied. Not by the empty space she had so carefully reserved, but by a man, a hulking figure with a florid face and an air of aggressive entitlement, who was already sprawled in her seat, his feet propped up on the ottoman, a half-empty glass of champagne in his hand, a look of smug satisfaction plastered across his features. A flicker of annoyance, a rare emotion for her, crossed her face, and she paused, a single beat of professional restraint before she spoke, her voice calm and level. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her tone a perfect balance of politeness and firmness, "I believe you're in my seat. I have a boarding pass for 1A. The man, without bothering to turn his head, waved a dismissive hand, a gesture of profound condescension that made her jaw clench. "Relax, sweetheart. It's just a seat. It's empty, isn't it? What's the big deal? I'm sure your seat's right over there. His voice, thick with an unearned superiority, was a grating sound, and Anya felt a sudden, cold anger begin to rise within her, the kind of quiet fury that was 1,000 times more dangerous than a loud outburst. It is not empty, it is my seat, she repeated, her voice now edged with a razor-sharp command, the years of leading multinational teams now evident in every word. And I have a pre-booked window seat, which is non-negotiable. Please, move. The man, finally roused to a flicker of minimal effort, turned his head, his small, beady eyes appraising her, a look of condescension and mild amusement crossing his face. Look, lady, he said, his tone dripping with patronizing disdain, I paid for a first-class ticket, and I think this seat's just a little bit better, don't you? It's a long flight. Just take the other one. A shadow fell over them as a flight attendant, a young, impeccably dressed woman with a sympathetic but tired expression, approached. The man's face brightened immediately, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across his lips. Ah, finally. Can you please tell this woman to find her own seat? I was here first, and she's causing a scene. The flight attendant, her gaze flitting nervously from Anya's controlled anger to the man's belligerent swagger, cleared her throat. Sir, I do see that your boarding pass is for 1B, and this passenger is assigned to 1A. The man scoffed, a loud, derisive sound that drew the attention of the handful of other first-class passengers. Oh, come on. It's an empty seat. She's just being difficult. I bet she doesn't even know how to work the fancy buttons in here. The blatant sexism, the casual dismissal of her authority, felt like a physical blow, and the carefully constructed fortress of Anya's calm began to crumble, a profound sense of outrage and humiliation, an echo of 1,000 past slights, rising to the surface, and she took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind that allowed her to regain her composure, to choose her next move with the precision of a master chess player. Sir, I am the founder and CEO of Valhalla Capital, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that still carried to the silent, watchful passengers. And I have a private office on this very floor, a staff that has been working with your airline for over a year to ensure my travel is seamless. I booked this seat because it is a necessity, not a luxury. Please, get out of my seat before I make a phone call that will make you regret the day you ever saw me. The man's sneer only widened, his eyes filled with a new, cruel amusement. Oh, she's a CEO now, he mocked, turning to the flight attendant with a theatrical roll of his eyes. Next, she'll be telling us she owns the airline. Look, sweetheart, I don't care who you are. This is my seat now. End of story. The climax of this silent, escalating war arrived in a single, heart-stopping moment of defiant arrogance, as the man leaned back in the seat, a final, definitive statement of his refusal, and Anya felt a profound, chilling stillness descend upon her, the kind of calm that precedes a storm, a quiet that was more terrifying than any rage. She no longer felt anger, only a cold, methodical clarity, the full, devastating power of her mind now unleashed and focused on a singular objective, to ground this flight, to make him understand that his petty act of aggression had not only cost him a seat, but had cost the lives of everyone on board, their time, their peace, and their purpose. She took out her phone, a simple, black slab of technology that was, in her hands, a weapon of mass destruction, and she opened her email, her fingers moving with a terrifying speed, finding the single, crucial contact she needed, the CEO of the airline's parent company, a man she had negotiated with for months over a massive, Strategic partnership. She composed a single, succinct email, a masterclass in professional, yet devastating, retribution. To all concerned parties at Globus Air, please be advised that your flight, #GA447, departing from JFK to London, has been grounded by my order. I have just been verbally abused and harassed by a passenger who stole my seat, and was subsequently dismissed by a flight attendant who sided with him. Effective immediately, I am canceling my company's multi-billion-dollar strategic partnership with Globus Air, and will be pursuing legal action for gross negligence and a flagrant breach of professional conduct. This is not a request, this is a directive. Ground the flight, now. She hit send. The man in her seat scoffed, "What, you're emailing the pilot, sweetie? You're going to get the whole plane grounded over a seat." The words were delivered with a mocking chuckle, a final, contemptuous flourish, and at that very moment, a voice, a sharp, authoritative voice, crackled over the PA system, cutting through the low murmur of the engines. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking. We have a sudden, unexpected change of plans. We've been instructed by airline operations to return to the gate immediately. I repeat, this flight has been grounded. We will be deboarding all passengers momentarily." The announcement, a cold, unequivocal statement of fact, landed in the cabin like a bombshell, and a collective gasp, a singular, sharp sound of shock and disbelief, escaped the lips of every passenger, a sound that was a symphony of stunned horror and dawning comprehension. The man in her seat, his smug, triumphant smile frozen on his face, looked up at the ceiling, then at Anya, his eyes wide and vacant with a terrifying, dawning horror. The flight attendant who had sided with him was pale, her face a sick, ashen gray. She was staring at Anya with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Anya simply reached for her travel bag in the overhead bin, her movements slow and deliberate, a final statement of her power, and as she walked toward the front of the plane, a solitary figure moving through a sea of frozen, astonished faces, a woman who had just brought a global airline to its knees with a single, devastating email, the hushed whispers of the other passengers a low, thrumming anthem of her victory. She stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jetway, the cold, still air of the tarmac a sudden, welcome shock, and as she stood there, a profound and almost overwhelming sense of relief, a shedding of the humiliation that had clung to her like a second skin, enveloped her, and she felt the quiet, fierce pride of a woman who knew her worth, a woman who had just taught a painful, costly lesson to a world that was still too full of people who believed they could steal a woman's peace, a woman's dignity, and a woman's hard-earned seat. Anya stepped onto the jet bridge, the sudden quiet a profound and welcome shock after the cacophony of dawning horror she had just left behind in the cabin, the cold, stale air of the jetway a refreshing contrast to the pressurized atmosphere of the plane, and as she walked, a solitary figure in her own, self-contained world, a profound sense of catharsis washed over her, a shedding of the profound, public humiliation that had clung to her like a second skin. Her phone buzzed in her hand, the screen alight with notifications, but she didn't look, didn't need to, for she knew with a certainty that was as solid as the ground beneath her feet that the reverberations of her single, decisive email were already tearing through the corporate headquarters of Globus Air, a seismic wave of panic and confusion. Back inside the first-class cabin, a scene of surreal, quiet chaos unfolded, as the man, still frozen in her stolen seat, his florid face now a sickly, ashen gray, looked up at the ceiling, then at the hushed, staring faces of the other passengers, the full, crushing weight of his arrogance finally settling upon him, the mockery on his face replaced by a raw, naked terror, the kind of fear that comes when a person of a certain type, one who has always believed themselves untouchable, discovers the true limits of their world. The flight attendant who had sided with him, a woman whose face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated panic, was desperately whispering into the pilot's ear, her words a frantic, incoherent stream of apologies and excuses, a pathetic, last-ditch attempt to claw her way back from the professional abyss into which she had just thrown herself, but the pilot, a man whose face was etched with a combination of furious disbelief and a bone-deep weariness, simply shook his head, his eyes fixed on the man in Anya's seat, a silent, accusatory gaze that spoke volumes about the magnitude of the mistake they had all just made. Anya emerged from the jetway into the crisp, cool air of the terminal, the bustling sounds of 1,000 distant conversations a welcome, grounding force, and standing there, a few yards from the gate, was her head of security, a tall, imposing man named David whose face was a study in professional concern. He held a tablet in his hand, his eyes scanning her with a worried intensity, and as she approached, he spoke, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "Anya? What happened? The airline C-suite is in a full-blown panic. I have their CEO, Mr. Hansen, on the phone. He says he just received an email from you and he's been trying to reach you since." Anya simply shook her head, a grim smile touching her lips. "Not yet, David. Let him sweat a little longer. He needs to fully appreciate the cost of his employees' arrogance." She walked past her bewildered assistant, her stride purposeful, her mind already moving on to the next task, her phone still buzzing with a relentless urgency, the notifications a drumbeat of her complete and total victory. She felt no glee, no triumph, only a quiet, fierce satisfaction that justice had been served, a profound and weary sense of peace that came from not only knowing her worth, but from enforcing it with a devastating and final authority. David, a man who had been with her since the early days of her company, seemed to understand, and he simply nodded, his eyes filled with a new, profound respect. He had seen her deal with 1,000 different crises, but he had never seen her execute a plan with such quiet, terrifying precision. They walked together, their footsteps a silent echo in the vast, empty terminal, a private, walking wake for the careers and reputations that had just been sacrificed on the altar of a stolen seat. She didn't look back, didn't need to. The man and the flight attendant were no longer a part of her world, they were simply a cautionary tale, a lesson that old prejudices and a sense of unearned superiority were no match for a woman who held not just the power of money, but the power of a principle. They were not just a problem to be solved, they were a problem that had been decisively and irreversibly ended. Back at his desk, in a glass-walled office high above London, Globus Air CEO, Arthur Hansen, a man whose life had been a carefully calibrated symphony of deals and acquisitions, stared at his computer screen, his face a mask of horrified disbelief, the single, devastating email from Anya Sharma a poison arrow lodged in his heart. His phone, which had been ringing off the hook with frantic calls from his board, his legal team, and his operations center, lay on his desk, its screen a silent, impotent beacon of the chaos she had just unleashed. He had laughed when he first heard about the so-called disruption, a petty customer complaint that his staff was supposed to handle, but he wasn't laughing now. He was staring at the single, stark line in her email that read, "Effective immediately, I am canceling my company's multi-billion-dollar strategic partnership with Globus Air," a sentence that, in a single moment, had erased years of painstaking negotiations, months of legal wrangling, and a projected windfall of profit that would have secured his legacy, and he felt a cold, visceral fear, the kind of dread that comes not from a loss, but from a total, Unexpected defeat. He had known Anya Sharma for months, had seen her relentless intelligence and her unshakable will, but he had never once considered the possibility that she would be capable of such a devastating act of professional retribution over something as seemingly insignificant as a seat, and he knew now, with a clarity that was both horrifying and profoundly humbling, that he had fundamentally misjudged the woman and the quiet, terrible power she commanded, a power that was not just about money, but about a principle, a quiet, unyielding refusal to be disrespected. He leaned back in his leather chair, the luxurious office suddenly feeling like a prison, and he closed his eyes, the memory of Anya's fierce, commanding gaze flashing in his mind, and he felt a profound, chilling sense of admiration for a woman who was willing to lose a deal to win her dignity, a woman who had taught him, and his entire company, a brutal and unforgettable lesson in the true cost of arrogance.